We're going to start with this session where the rapporteurs of the 4 groups will try to convene what have been the main messages around the questions that were selected by the moderators. So I come from group 1 that was about systemic specific green nudges, policy impacts and scaling. We were 9 of us from 5 different countries and 3 different backgrounds, including research, public administration, and NGOs. And we focused mainly on 4 questions. The first question was about what makes nudge succeed. And surprisingly enough, the message I took is that nudges work if they work. So, but okay, they work in the sense that they are accepted by the administration if they work. That means that they deliver the desired outcome. And this relates what Natasha mentioned. That we need to come to policymakers with hard evidence that we have collected ourselves in the projects to showcase that they actually work. And for a nudge to work, or for a behavioral informed intervention, if we want to be a bit broader, they have to be embedded in existing frameworks. Ad hoc interventions from a research team that tests and leaves are not perceived as trustworthy. So probably it's behavioral interventions that use what it's already used by the administration and give it a twist that are more acceptable. So don't develop an app, tweak the flyer that they are doing. If they are sending letters to the farmers, focus on the farmer and not try to come with a very fancy app that you will develop. It's also important to start with low-hanging fruits that create appetite for more. So focus on very clear behavioral heuristics or bias that we have known, that have been researched widely, and try to replicate it. And they need to focus on things that make sense. Farmers are not going to accept things that do not make sense to them, that have not been created. And they have to be promoted at the right time. Funny enough, promoting at the right time is one of the Prudent typology nudges that is called timely reminders. And interventions have to relate to the realities of the individuals that we are testing. Our Polish representative said that it's very difficult to nudge people talking about microbes, and it's much easier if you nudge farmers talking about soil health and how it promotes your yields and it can restore eroded areas. So know your audience when you are trying to nudge. And to do that, the co-creation of interventions is key. This a co-creation can already be a nudge because the policymaker can see how that is key. But co-creation should not lead to taking away agency from farmers. We cannot substitute command and control with nudge, command and control. Co-creation has to be really believed. And when selling why nudge matters, it has to have a return on investment. And the key is how we frame return. It's not only adoption, but it's also the feedback loops that create trust and bring people towards a system transformation. And of course, nudges will never work if the policy is bad. If there's an uncertain policy environment changing every time, nudging is not going to work, because last year I told you to do cover crops, and this year I'm telling you to burn residues. Then we focused on what are the policy and governance gaps to make sure that nudges can work. And here, the main gap that was mentioned is that policy gets lost in translation. From the design to the implementations, things change a lot. And the dialogue between the parties is very difficult, because if one says, I need collective action, and the other one says, well, that's in Article 3 of the regulation, but the actual person that has to be incentivized or nudged to do collective action doesn't see it in the field, there's no dialogue possible. Farmers need to have agency to change the system, not only in the policy design, but in the policy implementation. And that is where we can make a difference. The main gap here is that simplification fills everyone's mouth, but whenever someone comes with a simplification plan, normally it's more complicated than it was at the beginning. So sludge reduction is key, and flexibility by design should be the principle. There's a need of culture of experimentation for managing authorities. It cannot be a culture of being afraid of breaching the regulation and getting the funds not disbursed. So we need an enabling environment that helps people experiment, because in the end, our behavioral interventions need to be tested in an experimental setting. And even if group 3, I think, was talking about that, we saw that the main governance gap was advisors. We need behaviorally informed advisors to make sure that things happen. We need to remove friction and sludge for collective action. For example, capping, which everyone thinks that is good, that we shouldn't give so much money to one single farmer. But this is also a problem where in some countries, the payments are given to a collective and they reach capping very fast. And in some countries, they are given only to one person. And the other governance gap that we see is the need to reduce the ambition. I mean, we cannot expect that behavioral interventions will solve 70 years of problems of the CAP. Small effects are something, as someone mentioned, 5% can already be something huge, and it can also be the start of the wheel of change. If the first result is small and they say this is not going to work, we are not going to keep improving. So let's accept that these small effects that we are showcasing are relevant and important and are the basis to grow further. And then we were discussing on how to combine behavioral informed interventions and other CAP interventions. And here, the main message is that you cannot change with 20 words or a smiley icon the impact of 348 billions of the CAP. Yeah? I mean, it's a bit ambitious of ourselves to think that, and nudges have to go with the instruments that are already there. They are not a new policy tool. There are twists that you can give to policy tools. And this relates to one of the, in this last panel, one of my colleagues from the JRC was talking about this ambition to go from interventions to systemic change in the way that we do policy, and how it's easier to succeed when you put small behavioral tweaks into the whole bunch of policy instruments that you have. The natural entry points for nudges has been always agroenvironmental and climate measures or eco schemes. But again, why not direct payments? I mean, do we know anything about changing the framing of what the direct payment is? Farmers consider it my backpack, my right. And just by changing the understanding of this payment, not as a right, but as a compensation or as a reward, can help the fact that more sustainable practices are entitled. The CAP strategic plans could have been a tool for experimentation, but risk-averse policymakers did not go forward. And we listen a lot about regulatory sandboxes for biomanufacturing, for biotechnology. Maybe we also need the regulatory sandboxes for the CAP implementation. Areas where if you fail, the money is not going to be taken away, and failure is accepted. There's an opportunity in the new CAP to use this kind of interventions for the restructuring payments that were mentioned by Gregorio. This is a specific moment on time when a farm is changing, and behavioral interventions when there's change have shown promise. It's also accompanying a huge amount of money. We are talking about 300,000 euros that this person is going to take. So those 300,000 euros help and reinforce any intervention that goes against status quo, present bias, and risk aversion. I take risks if I have 300,000 euros in my pocket. Yeah, so that can be. And indeed, behavioral interventions can reduce the marginal cost of change and not just increase change, which is good. And it's not only the CAP, but as Erwin presented, there's many other people in the agricultural ecosystem that are influencing farmers. So it's not only behavioral public policy, but it's also behavioral interaction between agents in the value chain. And a final reflection, we tend to talk about nudging for good. And nudging for good, when there is a huge polarization on what good means, is very difficult. When good means for someone sustainable regenerative agriculture with no pesticides, and for someone else yields to feed the world, it's difficult that we are going to come to a common idea of what we are nudging for. So thank you very much.
Okay, so hello. I'm going to give you some notes on Group 2 discussion, where we explore behavioral segmentation and the acceptance and adoption of green nudges. Our group gathered 13 participants, and the discussion was quite active, actually. We had very fluid exchange of ideas drawing on different professional backgrounds and practical experiences from across the agriculture and forestry sectors. The discussion was structured in 4 different blocks. First, on the strategic impact and implementation of behavioral segmentation. There was a broad agreement that context matters. Effective nudging is not only about identifying who to target, but also when and how to intervene. Segmentation can help tailor interventions to specific groups and increase effectiveness, and once a successful nudge has been developed, it can potentially be adapted and transferred to other audiences. However, some participants also highlighted important challenges. As segmentation becomes more sophisticated, implementation becomes more complex and costly. There are some concerns around scalability, the difficulty of obtaining meaningful evidence from small groups, and the risk of creating segments that unintentionally drive people towards a predetermined outcome. So several participants also noted that poorly designed segmentation may generate some resistance rather than acceptance from the audience, especially if people feel categorized incorrectly or perceive the intervention as paternalistic somehow. Particularly interesting discussion during this first part of the session focused on farmers and foresters. While social influence can be important, the participants stress that we should not assume farmers simply will follow what their neighbors are doing, because the economic reality, the risk perception, and local context often matter more than policymakers expect. And what works in one community or production system may not work in another one. The second major theme of our group concerned the acceptance among farmers and foresters. We fortunately have 2 representatives of one of each of the sectors. And one of the strongest messages was the importance of local leadership and trusted ambassadors. Participants shared examples where engaging a representative individual within a community helped to spread new practices far more effectively than top-down approaches. So when we heard practical experiences showing how one motivated person can influence a wider network and facilitate knowledge transfer. The discussion also highlighted that people are motivated by different things. Some are driven by environmental values, others by economic benefits, risk reduction, or social identity. And this suggests that segmentation can be valuable, but only if it reflects real motivation and local realities. Participants also emphasized that success should be judged realistically. Achieving behavioral change among even a portion of the target group can represent a significant policy achievement, even if it's not 100%. The third area focused on ethics and governance. A recurring observation was that nudging is already widely used in areas such as marketing, yet it often faces greater scrutiny when discussing public policy. Transparency emerged as a central principle during the discussion. Participants generally agreed that people are more accepting of behavioral interventions when they understand their purpose and trust the institutions behind them. We also discussed the importance of co-creation. and you also mentioned this in group 1, and I'm sure that in other groups, that it's very important to involve farmers and forest owners in the design of the interventions, because this can strengthen legitimacy and effectiveness, although it might reduce some of the cost advantages traditionally associated with nudges. So everything has its pros and its cons. Interestingly, several participants question whether resistance through nudges sometimes can come from the terminology itself. Terms such as nudge or even green may create unintended barriers. Some suggested that language framing and cultural context are critical, and that concepts such as sustainability, resilience, maybe trust, or shared benefits may resonate more strongly with certain audiences. We were even discussing that people is tired of the word green directly, and that we need to find something new to talk about what we are talking today, basically. And finally, regarding policy integration and the future CAP framework, participants emphasized the need to better connect environmental, economic, and social objectives. Behavioral segmentation could help tailor agri-environmental measures, but only if policymakers have a deeper understanding of how farmers and forest owners actually make decisions. A key recommendation was to strengthen the co-creation cycles. Again, understanding stakeholders, designing intervention, and then returning to stakeholders to test and refine them. And actually, that's part of the things that we are trying to do in ForestAgriGreenNudge. And another thing that participants highlighted is the need for a more coherent framework across policy areas and governance levels, where recognizing that practical incremental solution might be more effective than highly complex designs. So to conclude, our group saw considerable potential in behavioral segmentation, but only when it's applied carefully, transparently, and in ways that reflect the realities of those it seeks to engage. Acceptance, trust, context, and also co-creation emerge as the key ingredients of success. Thank you very much.
Summary of Group 3 was about green nudges, ACIs, and digital tools. The group was heterogeneous, about 18 people. Mark was the chairman. So first of all, I think all of you are aware and know very well what ACIS is. So Agricultural Knowledge and Innovation System. It's a concept that is embedded in EU Common Agricultural Policy and refers to the network and actors involved in creating, sharing, and applying agricultural knowledge and innovation. And basically, it's a set of things that want to bridge the knowledge from the labs and the science to the farmers and translate this knowledge into actual practices. So how we were kind of tackling how nudges can help and support this system, this knowledge system, including digital tools that are important instruments through which the knowledge can be channeled to the receivers that are, in most of the case, farmers. So we have the first pillar is the research and knowledge production that is funded through within the European context through European Horizon Europe projects. And then we have innovation partnerships which connects experts, advisors, and practitioners. And then we have these farm advisory systems in which every member state organize and to self-organize to provide guidance to farmers on a voluntary basis. And this voluntary basis is kind of also a critical and key issue that we'll come back later. So here in this report, I will identify the 3 main challenges and some enabling factors that can help the system work better with the help of nudges as well. So first is the first challenge is related to trust, transparency, and data concerns related to digital tools. A major issue raised was the lack of trust surrounding digital tools. Farmers are often asked to provide large amounts of data, but sometimes they do not always understand how the data will be used. They might not see sufficient added value in return, and they fear issues related to confidentiality and compliance. So participants stress that many digital tools are commercial, while ACIS is kind of public-oriented system. So transparency here is kind of needed in order to understand who owns the tool, what the data are used for, and for what purposes. So this is kind of an essential ingredient that need to be channeled through while the ACIS makes use of digital tools. There were also concerns that segmentation and targeting approaches could become exclusionary if not handled transparently and ethically. A second set of barriers is related to behavioral biases and resistance to change. So how can we convince farmers to change their way, their mindset, before it's too late? So there were examples that farmers tend to realize that they might change and they want to change when they really fear the pressure, when they kind of on the edge of the cliff. The challenge for the ACIS system is to anticipate this and create enabling conditions that make them aware of the need of change for their good and for societal good before the risk comes at the very high levels. Together with the fact that participants noted that farmers are already under significant administrative and regulatory pressure, especially regarding CAP requirements. Policies are often perceived as coming from above, increasing stress and resistance. So for sure, there was a strong agreement of no golden bullet solution. So nudges can help facilitate this, but not on a generalized form. And that sustainable transition requires gradual, multi-step processes that include the conditions that we will see later, one of which is transparency and ethical approach. There were participants repeatedly stressed that developers of digital tools often assume that farmers are the only end users of digital tools, whereas this might not be always the case. Sometimes tools are needed by and used by intermediaries and other users. So here comes the need to design differently depending on whether they target farmers, advisors, cooperatives, or other actors along the value chain. And the need for co-creation that once again come very often in the discussion. That, I mean, might lead to better relevance of the tools and higher adoption because it's more understood, it's more tailored to the needs, to the local needs, and more adopted and diffused. We talked about the possibility of having ambassadors again that might play an important role in the diffusion of good practices and the use of tools. Finally, we stressed the important role of advisors. And advisors are humans, and as humans, they have subject to biases and misunderstanding or lack of knowledge. So the importance of training of advisors training is key, particularly on soft skills that might improve their knowledge skills, behavioral change, capacity to communicate the importance of behavioral change to the farmers while they deliver their service. Finally, a big barrier is related to the fact that participants to ACIS activities are not rewarded. Advisors are rewarded, scientists are rewarded for their job, But farmers, while they're getting trained, they are not rewarded for it. They are not paid. And this is a big barrier that might prevent farmer from accessing and going to the trainings. So what are the enabling factors and recommendations from our group? First, co-creation and participation. One of the strongest messages was the importance of involving users from the beginning. I think this is kind of well rooted and understood today, because this helps building ownership, trust, usability, and legitimacy of the tools, and like both training tools and digital tools. Demonstration and peer learning, these are important. Seeing is believing was said by some participant. Pilot demonstrations are, again, an important tool, seems to work. And again, I think we together with what we learned from other groups, nudging can be an instrument that can be used during the AKIS in order to make AKIS more digestible and acceptable and nicer and easier to understand. Third, tailored and context-specific support is needed. Participants emphasize that nudges within AKIS must remain farmer-driven, context-specific, and demand-led. So we need to really understand what is the demand, what is the need, and then design solutions to their needs. Last, about segmentation, I think an important variable for, we thought as a group that an important variable for segmentation is the extent to which farmers are young, belong to the young generation or the old generation, as well as whether they got some training, some specific agricultural training or not. Because it was shown, evidence that younger trained farmers are kind of drivers of innovation and are easier to grasp lessons from AKIS, and these can become like, they can become like drivers and ambassadors because they are more open, more willing to take a calculated risk, more receptive to sustainability transition. However, participants stress the continued importance of direct human contact and trusted advisory relationship, because this is the way to break the status quo and the closed mindset of many farmers. So final key takeaways: successful green nudges within AKIS are not must depend on trust, co-creation, transparency, tailored advisory support, training of the advisory systems, and long-term relationship building. I think that's it.
Thank you. And the final group, Group 4, the session considered the role of legitimacy, governance and ethics within interventions and nudges as they come. There were 14 of us within our group. We focused on 3 main questions, had 3 panelists, and then subsequent points were raised throughout the session. The purpose of the questions were intended to start from the theoretical and move into the EU level and end on a practical national level. So it started wide and then slowly worked down to very practical steps. The first question that we looked into was the link between legitimacy, including transparency, procedure, distribution, and then the effectiveness of behavioural informed interventions, that there can be ambiguity there. So how do we balance this? How do we make sure that actually legitimacy does not undermine effectiveness, or even if there are trade-offs within that? It was said that the ideal of the European Commission level is for better policies that encompass freedom, and this therefore flows down to nudges that are used. We needn't think of it as a trade-off. In fact, often a condition of effectiveness is that level of transparency. And I think someone else shared it earlier as well, that evidence shows that higher levels of transparency lead to a higher willingness to make changes. And this can also be found within some of our work of System 1 nudges. It was raised and much more emotional, whereas System 2 nudges that allow you to consciously evaluate, those are supported by if you know what you are trying to evaluate. And that can be done through transparency and understanding. So when transparency, if it needs to be embedded within the process, it was shared that this should not be an afterthought, but should be at the beginning of projects. Nudges can be open, transparent, and as shared by everyone else, co-created with stakeholders. They can be part of the design. And if stakeholders co-create, then this inherently allows them to know what the project is, the objectives, what it is trying to do, and therefore making it work. Trust can be embedded from the outset. There was also a question raised around sort of segmentation, around actually how do we make sure that if we start to segment sort of nudges, as was shared this morning, as was shared by Group 2, how do we also make sure that that is transparent and legitimate? The final thing that was raised within this particular question around that balance between effectiveness and legitimacy is that actually a lot of the research that's been shared and has been identified focuses on effectiveness and efficiency, but actually further research can wade into evaluating the ethics of nudges and the impact of those among the process. This is something that's not presently done as much, it was shared, and research could really strengthen the validity there. The next question was around at the EU level, should the EU provide an ethical framework for nudges? How do we guarantee and embed that transparency? There was discussion here as to the degree of regulation, how much regulation should actually be centered around this. Regulation could be considered to ensure that patterns of manipulation should be forbidden. But then this could also build upon other disciplines such as psychology, who might have already made quite considerable inroads in terms of the ethics of that. And so therefore we can look to what other disciplines are already doing. There was discussion here as to the degree of regulation, and it was considered by many participants that at this particular stage, whilst research is very much still ongoing, that principles, as opposed to outright regulation, so principles and guidelines, could potentially work slightly better, but more consideration can be had as to that. We could also consider that principles could also prove useful for those countries within the EU that aren't yet considering behavioural insights and supporting them within that. If you were to have regulations, then transparency should be embedded. And it is important to understand the criteria that would be used for that transparency, because transparency can be quite a wide array as well. And so further consideration should be had there. The final part of that particular discussion was around if you did start to have regulations or even guidelines, what would be the practical considerations for that and how could that be done alongside the limitations of this? We needed to move on to the next question, but there was started to be some real conversations that I had there, and I think we could really talk about that some more. And then the final section was around the national level and what CAP strategic plans can do to facilitate the legitimacy, the transparency and the governance. And so actually, even if you have, we didn't really get a lot of time to talk about this, but it was shared that even if you have that level of transparency and you have that level of motivation, facilitation of changes still needs to be done. Sometimes schemes are positive, sometimes they are good, but actually behavioural elements can still be added in, practical considerations. So how do you redesign communications? How do you reduce the burdens on farmers and foresters to actually get involved within some of those schemes so that they are both aware of what the projects are trying to do and they can be part of that to make sure that sustainable change happens. Thank you.
So I think that Nikos, you can take over from here.
So thank you very much for these great discussions, all the inputs. I feel like a student who is called to say what did you learn from today's lesson. And so I start with the difficult part. I'm sure I'm going to forget everyone important, but thanks very much to the people who organized this wonderful conference, Anna, Villana, Tamara, Katerina, Natasha. Do you know how many I'm forgetting? Many, right? Michael. Thank you. Thank you very much for interrupting and for your oh, Raquel, oh, Alun. Oh, I forgot all. You see how altruistic I am. I forgot all our project. Thank you, Raquel and Alun. Yeah, it was really great. The speakers were amazing. The panelists and the rapporteurs were, really good. I think we could conclude that we still don't know many things. And I also think that, like I thought in the beginning, which means I didn't change my mind, not only that we don't know enough, but we really need to package our knowledge in a way which is becoming more systematic. So I still think that we don't have a strong theory and we don't have the necessary expectations for the empirical results to be classified in a way that meaningful boxes can be used for what we're learning. At the same time, I see we're learning a lot, and the most important thing, we want to learn, and we have created these two beautiful projects, Prudent and ForestAgriGreenNudge, in which we are continuously trying to generate knowledge. I have to manage a little bit expectations of the policymakers here. At the end of these projects, we're not going to have all the definite answers, not even most of them. I'm not sure even if many of them, but we will have some. And by using this honesty in what we are doing, especially the people who are testing, therefore I take very seriously what Jacopo said. With good science, we can learn better and more things than with not good science. I really hope, as an official, okay, I'm not going to say that, but I really hope that we will not need too much regulation to go on the way of something that is supposed to be there to reduce the need for regulation. But I know, policymakers as well must be aware that the European Union is receiving a lot of criticism about regulating too many things too much. And if we can keep it to the side where we can convince the users that we are on their side, or if we really actively put them on our side, maybe we will need to regulate ourselves a little bit less. Did I learn something more? Yes, that the participation of the nudged people is an important thing. It's not a curiosity. It's not like other measures, maybe because of the nudges themselves, or because we have learned so much from other regulations. now we know it's better to have more the approval of the people we're going to address. So doing that, maybe it's a good example for other measures of policy. Maybe it's not only nudges, but other things need more of approval and co-design. We know how this sometimes becomes the wrong side of it when people just negotiate, lobby, and still represent in collective bodies different sides. But if the stake is the planet, it's our only house for the moment, and I'm not so optimistic about other projects which hope for another planet and stuff like that. So if this is our common house and we all care, I don't know why we should worry too much about motivations. All motivations are good as long as we want to produce food and goods that we need in a planet that needs to live as long as we want to live as a civilization. A minor conclusion I have is that we said farmers and agriculture about 10 to 12 times more than forests and forestry. And because of that, first of all, I apologize personally to my own colleagues and to all the other people who are representing forests, trees, and all these nice producers of oxygen and future for all of us. And maybe we need to find maybe our side, or I wouldn't say side project, but our synergical efforts to focus on the forestry more, and promise that in the next conference, it's not going to be 50-50, I know, Jan, but hopefully it's going to be 60-40. At least I will be, yes. So this is what I think I learned from this, but there was officially an time for discussion. So are there questions, omissions, objections? Enthusiastic approval of what I just said. Okay, thank you very much. Keep connected, keep following the projects. We promise we're going to do more exciting things in what's remaining for the projects, because now we've learned so much from what we haven't done yet. So what is coming is really more exciting and more in quantity. Thanks very much.